Good evening, this is John Milburn in relation to Laws 12067 Environmental Law. Well, we've reached week 12 and all we have now is the exam. In term 3, we do not have the usual weekly break between the week 12 and the exam period. So the exam is on you now. I understand it's next Tuesday. Best of luck with the exam. A couple of rules that you need to consider. I've outlined some of these on the front page of Moodle. The first is be aware that the exam is worth 50% or 50 marks. And there is the compulsory question worth 20 marks. The compulsory question is a problem-based question. So it's reasonably lengthy in terms of duration, so it'll take some time reading through that. Unfortunately, I can't be too specific, but I've given some hints about the content of that first part on the front page of Moodle. And I'd encourage you to read that carefully and work towards an answer that will enable, will fit within those categories. So essentially you're going to be asking to give her an advice as if you're a lawyer and you're acting for a party to some form of litigation effectively involving an environmental law principle or scenario. So remember your IRAC method, go back to basics in terms of how you identify the issues, the rules, then apply those rules and come to a conclusion. As part of that, of course, you need to identify the material facts. So be prepared to read carefully to extract that which is important and discard that which is less important or not important at all. You will need to cite some cases. You will need to refer to your material, whether it's a primary source or a secondary source. Now, bear in mind that I appreciate in a handwritten examination, it's very difficult to attempt to footnote, so I would suggest you don't even try. You do need to reference your material. I'm not concerned about formal referencing. What I really want is for you to identify the source of your material. So use Harvard referencing, which is, I guess, essentially in simple terms, write what you have extracted from somewhere else, and then in brackets put the nature of your source of work. And you can be shorthand about this. Even if you write Bates page 727, close brackets, I'll know that you mean Bates Environmental Law in Australia, 8th edition, so you don't have to write that in full. So use shorthand. I'm much more interested in reading about your legal commentary than ensuring that you've referenced in full. But you must reference the material in some way. The rules of plagiarism do apply in an examination context, so please be aware of that. So that's part A, 20%. Part B is 3 essay-style questions out of 6. Now, I must confess, when I prepared the paper, inadvertently, in one part of the exam paper, I wrote 3 from 5. But elsewhere I corrected that information. It is clearly 3 from 6. And just to ensure there's absolutely no doubt about this, I prepared an errata and that should come through on the exam paper. So you'll see that it's a confirmation that it is in fact 3 from 6 questions. Now, in relation to those, they're worth 10 marks each, and that then comprises the 50 marks. These are essay-style questions. I haven't provided you with any examples, but I could say that they're broad in their application. So the sort of questions that you might see in sort of introduction to law type exam, where you're asked to critique, analyse, discuss things of that nature, or identify certain aspects that relate to environmental law. And of course, given that you've got a choice of 3 from 6, I really can't give you too many hints about what the actual questions will be. Suffice to say that there'll be plenty of options to choose from. Now, when it comes to writing your exam papers, you need to follow some of the basic rules. I'm still looking for good grammar and good writing, so don't fall into the trap of writing in a long, convoluted manner. So keep your sentences to the point, keep your writing simple, and that is always the way that we want to proceed these days. So make effective use of your time. Make sure that you allocate enough time to read the material, and then segment your time roughly in accordance with the number of marks. And bear in mind, of course, that the first 50% of the marks that you might achieve are achieved much more easily than the second 50%. So please don't fall into the trap of writing a beautifully detailed, lengthy answer for one question, followed by nothing or scant material for the second. So try and balance them out. Remember that first 50% is the easiest to get. In your question, you may feel that you can identify what the questions might be in the exam. So feel free to write something of a model answer and take that in with you. It's open book exam after all. And you can take in anything, provided of course you can't access the internet, and I think the other exception is for some reason a standard dictionary. But what I mean is that if you think that you understand that one of the questions might be a certain topic, well, why not have your answer written at least in general terms, and then you can reproduce it in an exam. Now, one of the advantages of open book exam, of course, is you're able to do that sort of thing. You're able to access your text and other materials. The downside of an open book exam is that I will mark it on the basis that it is open book, and therefore the quality of the exam paper should be much higher than if it was a closed book examination that relies to some degree on memory. So please bear that in mind as well. So make sure that you plan before the exam by writing notes that you can usefully use in the exam. Make sure that you read the exam question carefully, and particularly in Part A, identify the material facts and then go from there. Make sure that you allocate a reasonable length of time and a reasonable weighting for each question, depending on the amount of marks allocated for that question. And then follow the basics in terms of IRAC, in terms of putting the material through. So there's some of the basics that you need to follow in terms of the examination technique and preparation, of course. So if there's any questions, please feel free to ask through UCrew, of course. And in the meantime, if anyone has any questions now that they'd like to ask about the examination, please let me know. I understand that the exam is on Tuesday, the 16th of February. And I also understand, and please check with university on this, I understand that the time for the examination is local time. But please ensure that you know exactly where you need to go for your examination, and that you know the time, and make sure that you give yourself enough time to get there comfortably. All right, now we've got a few people online, which is great. Does anyone have any questions, wish to make any comments? I indicated this would be a short session tonight, purely about the examination or any issues that you wanted to raise from something that we've covered through the course. Okay.
I don't have any, John.
Yes, Tony. Oh, nothing, Tony? All right, thank you. Anyone else got any questions? All good? Okay. Just a question regarding cases that may be helpful for the exam. All right, so Shane, would you like to ask that question?
Sorry, John, I'm at the library here. I'm just trying to get this all together. No, I was just wondering if there was any, and I normally don't like to ask about the cases and stuff like that, but just because there seems to be very limited cases compared to like other subjects, is there any kind of area that we might be able to look for with cases, or just along the lines of what we've gone through in the questions? Is that the kind of the approach it's going to be?
Yeah, and when you say cases, do you mean an essay-style question asking for you to critique a particular case? Is that the sort of thing that you're talking about, Shane?
Yeah, along those lines, and just also with the more the problem question. Yeah, I'm trying to go through. I've gone through. I think you've given some useful advice from the last few weeks, which I'm hopefully on the right track for. But I just think with the problem question, because I'm just struggling a little bit with where I should be looking for with regards to that. More part A than part B.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Part A is where, from my perspective, I expect that I will have a great range of quality of answers. No doubt it will be the hard part of the exam. It'll be the hard part of the entire course. Part B will be much more comfortable. It'll be pretty basic and provide you with an opportunity to reproduce materials and provide some comments in addition to that reproduction of materials, properly referenced, of course. So the essay-style questions will be pretty easy. The problem question, of course, will relate to something that we've covered during the course. I've given an indication on Moodle of, I think, 3 broad areas. So it may be that you're acting for a property developer or owner, or an objector, that is a submitter, or a council. And you'll be in a scenario where you're asked to provide some advice as if you were a lawyer. And in relation to the scenario, for one of those 3 parties, it will be dealing with a possible merits appeal. That's very broad. Or an alleged failure to comply with conditions of development permit, and a question relating to enforcement orders, or an alleged failure to comply with environmental laws generally, and providing advice in relation to a proposed prosecution and or defence. So they're probably the 3 main areas. And I did say it may relate to those. So I've left myself a little bit of room to say it may not be, but I think I would definitely concentrate on those areas. Now, when it comes to dealing with a merits review, I guess you've got to think in terms of the sort of cases that we've dealt with by way of merits review. So you need to understand what's a merits review, which court deals with merits reviews. I haven't mentioned judicial review in that list. I'm not saying that the scenario can't be judicial review, but it's not likely to be judicial review. So it's probably a merits review, merits appeal. And ask yourself this: do I go to the primary sources or the secondary sources in order to answer the first problem? Always, my thoughts are, go to the primary sources. So primary sources, legislation first and case law second. So if you're dealing with a question in relation to, let's say, an enforcement order, which is the second scenario of the possible 3 scenarios that I've given you, the first thing I would do is find the legislative basis for making an enforcement order and be aware of that legislative basis. From that, you can then derive, do some research and have a few key cases that you might think are important. Likewise, if the question relates to environmental law and prosecution of environmental laws, ask yourself, where are the environmental laws contained at first instance? What is the legislative basis for a prosecutor to initiate proceedings in relation to an alleged breach of environmental laws? So what is the legislation that deals with transgressions, criminal matters involving a breach of environmental law? From that, you can then consider how a prosecutor might go about dealing with the prosecution, or conversely, dealing with the question of how a person may respond to an allegation that he or she or they or it has breached an environmental law from a criminal perspective. I mentioned the word it there, so bear in mind, of course, that it may be an environmental prosecution that involves a company, and you may have to consider the possible role of directors in the context of that environmental litigation, criminal perspective. So there's some good commentary, I think, in the notes about that. So Shane, I'm doing a lot of talking. I'm not sure if I'm actually answering anything, but what I would suggest is, to answer your question, don't worry too much about the case law at first instance. Think about the legislation, then think about the case law, and if that's not enough, then think about the secondary sources. That's what I would do anyway.
No, that's helpful, because the way it's worded on there, how you've explained it's very much how I took it, is more going to be reactive to a case as opposed to trying to argue from the start of the case the problem question. It's more going to be a result and look at the approach that way, which is kind of what I wasn't a bit unsure of. That's all. But yeah, that's me happy.
Oh, great. Thanks, Shane. Yeah, so just to confirm, you'll be put into a position where you're responding to a hypothetical factual scenario, and you then work the legal position from there. Okay, so thanks, Shane. Appreciate that. Now, are there any other questions? All right. Well, best of luck for the exam. If I could just ask a favour, and that is, we've got less than 50% of people have their say. So please, if you haven't already done so, push the big red button at the top left-hand corner of Moodle. I need another 5 replies, please. All right, all the best for the exam. Thank you very much for participating in this course. I wish you all the best in your respective careers and your future studies. I'll stop the broadcast now, but if there are any questions, please ask through UCrew. All the best.